Hi, Faith family. This is Pastor Eric Tober here with Dick Slemons, and I've asked Dick if he would come and chat with us a little bit because of the coronavirus. And so first of all, Dick, how long have you been going to attending Faith?
I've been attending here with my family, started with my wife and one child. We now have 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren. We've been here 30 years.
Awesome. That's great. First of all, thank you for your faithfulness and service. And you have a little background, I've heard, that knows a little bit about viruses. So tell us about that.
Well, it's kind of a long story and not the direct route, but I grew up in Nebraska, went to the University of Nebraska for 2 years, transferred to Colorado State, graduated from Colorado State as a veterinarian. I went into practice in Nebraska for a grand total of about 2-3 months, and I got drafted in 1965 for the military.
So thank you for serving our country.
And had some interesting jobs, but I ended up in Northeast Thailand in 1968 and 69 and worked there on a base and out of that base in nearby areas. And I got interested in disease control in animal populations, humans and animals, which was a big variation from being a practitioner and treating individual animals. But what I saw over there was a population medicine I thought was interesting and important. So I came back to University of Wisconsin to work there. Then I went to Armed Forces Institute of Pathology in Washington, D.C. and worked with geographic pathology diseases from different parts of the world. And back to Wisconsin for a little more study. And from there I went to the school.
Well, you got your master's and your PhD there, right?
Yeah. And then I went to the School of Aerospace Medicine in San Antonio, Texas, and worked in epidemiology and general disease investigations, but also in the virology lab, working with rabies and respiratory diseases and basic trainings. From there, about that time I got married finally. Started a little late, but my wife and I, we went to Indonesia for 3.5 years. We worked with the Naval Area Medical Research Unit number 2, which was in Jakarta at that time. And we worked on, I started at the University of Wisconsin, I started working with influenza viruses, right from the beginning. So both my master's and PhD was on influenza. So I was over there working with influenza, respiratory diseases, also got involved with chikungunya and Japanese encephalitis and little Zika virus indirectly, but mainly influenza and dengue. So I came back to the United States after that, spent 1 year as a preventive medicine officer in a regional hospital, mainly working with hepatitis and field disposures that the troops were getting. And then I retired and took a job here at Ohio State University, and I had 28 years there, and then I've retired, been retired for 6 years now, or working on 6.
Wow, that's an amazing journey.
My focus usually has been on influenza viruses, respiratory viruses. Here it's mainly been on influenza virus, mainly in birds and pigs and horses, and how it relates to the viruses that are emerging, type A influenza viruses. So that's kind of my
That's an amazing journey. Wow.
I wouldn't have predicted that.
God takes us on an amazing journey. So I have a couple questions that I think will help our faith family as we're kind of asking questions about this. So my first question is, we've heard that this virus is like the flu. And is this true? And or what is the difference between, let's say, the flu, the common flu, and the this virus, the coronavirus, right? Corona. I think about beer when I say that.
Yeah, let's not do that. I'll make a distinction right here. When I say influenza, I mean the disease or an infection.
Okay.
And when I'm talking about the virus, it's influenza A virus. Same thing with corona. Coronavirus is the agent that causes this corona, what they call it, COVID-19.
Right.
The disease, the infection.
Gotcha.
So they're two different things. So the diseases, influenza and coronavirus infections, they have similarities. They're both respiratory, cause respiratory infections, though the coronaviruses have the potential to cause enteric infections also in
What is that?
AMLA,
Oh,
digestive tract,
okay.
diarrhea.
Okay. I understand that word.
We get that one. So, yeah, it's a little more versatile than influenza in its clinical presentation and infections. Though I think these COVID-19 is primarily respiratory, the respiratory tract. So in that sense, they're similar. The agents have some similarities too. They're both envelope viruses, meaning they have a lipid envelope around the nucleic acid, which transmits the information. And that's why it's important to use soap and water and wash your hands, because being a lipid envelope, you use soap and wash your hands adequately with a good detergent soap. It breaks the lipid envelope up and inactivates the virus more quickly. So they're both relatively easy viruses to inactivate by sanitation. And that's obviously what we're hearing in the news, the most important thing. They're both RNA viruses, but they're different there too. RNA viruses are unique in the fact that they just have RNA, and RNA doesn't have proofreading. You hear about DNA, our genetics, our DNA,
Right.
the double strand. Well, when that's duplicated, our system has a reading, proofreading, make sure that all the nucleotides are in the right order.
Okay.
Putting the DNA together.
Yeah.
With RNAs, they don't have a reading mechanism of editing. So there's a lot more point mutations.
Okay.
That's especially a problem with type A influenza viruses, because there's 8 different segments in the influenza virus of the RNA, and they can get a mutation anywhere in there. And they occur quite frequently. That's why we have a new vaccine every 2 or 3 years for humans.
Mm-hmm.
The coronaviruses have a single strand of RNA, much bigger, a single strand. So any fatal or any derogatory or deactivating mutation in that RNA stops the whole virus. So coronaviruses tend to be a little more stable once they appear. We have quite a few strains, well, not a lot of strains. We have 4 or 5 major serologic strains of coronaviruses. But influenza, we have thousands.
Right. And we feel like, what I've heard is that we feel like with influenza, we know about it. It's still, I think I heard a stat that said 15,000 people died last year, but we know about it, and therefore we feel more comfortable. This we know less about.
We don't understand these viruses well. Usually we're most familiar with the coronaviruses. They cause colds, about 10% of our colds. And those can be mixed infections with other respiratory viruses, and it increases the severity. And that may be some of what we're seeing now.
So partly what you're saying is there's this larger family of coronaviruses, and that this is a more unique strain
A
of that.
serotype in them.
Gotcha.
But it's not near as geographic or antigenically diverse or genetically diverse as influenza virus. So they're very different.
Gotcha.
In that sense.
Wow, that's that very helpful. I feel like I just had a class,
Yeah.
and that was good.
Probably too much.
No. We've heard this prediction that the virus is going to peak. I was on a phone call with 300 pastors and talking to the governor's office and some of the medical experts there. They're saying that it's going to peak possibly mid-April, mid-May. Can you explain why they're predicting this and the whole idea of trying to flatten the curve so that there's not as much overload on hospitals and that kind of thing? Is that legit?
Well,
It's
easier to say they're predicting.
Yes.
Because we don't know.
Don't know.
And we haven't had enough experience with this virus in areas where we're getting good baseline data to say that. They're basing that basically off China, where it dropped off after 2 months in Wuhan province. But that may be just all the people were infected, and there were no more susceptible hosts. So if we start slowing down the transmission in the United States, which we definitely should do, it will flatten. They talk about flattening the epidemic curve. Instead of going like this, like China, it'll come like this. And what that will do is it'll protect our available medical resources and personnel, so we'll have adequate medical care for those that get critically ill. Now, will it shut down as quick if it doesn't transmit as quick? I don't know. I think also a lot of them are just subconsciously, or not subconscious, they're all very bright compared to me, but that flu always does it. Influenza viruses become inactivated in warmer weather talk about they're very delicate, and therefore they expect there's a seasonal pattern to influenza, and I think a lot of them, either consciously or subconsciously, are thinking that this seasonal pattern will follow with this coronavirus also.
Okay.
But we don't know.
We don't know. And as Christians, one of the things that obviously we fall back on after we hear the science and know the science and don't know the future is we still trust the Lord in the midst of all of that. And so that's comforting, at least for me. I know as I've heard this and heard kind of additional information and tried to educate myself on it, I'm grateful. It's not my bravado. I'm grateful that I felt like, wow, okay, if I got it, even if I died or if something happened, like I don't feel a fear, and so that's good. Well, I have a follow-up question on this idea of the.
Let me go back 2 things I didn't mention here.
Okay.
I've got some shipping tracks.
Yeah, that's fine.
Number 1 is whether it's flu or coronavirus, and you hear people talking about this. Basically, clinically, they're treated very similarly.
Right.
You wouldn't change your clinical treatment as supportive care and support, and you would treat both of them the same way. The other thing that's different about the diseases, it appears, is influenza, the incubation period from the time you're exposed until you're clinically ill is maybe 3 to 4 days. And you do shed virus a little bit before you become clinical, but it's a very more limited time. This virus, apparently, they say incubation period is 3 days to 14 days.
Right.
And you would be shedding potentially, people think anyway, virus many days prior to developing clinical signs or symptoms.
So would that be the reason that the governor has said, we don't want public gatherings and we want to close the schools for 3 weeks because that's like an extra, a little bit beyond the 14 days?
I think that's part of it. Yeah, it's a disease that causes infections very quickly and clinical illness very quickly. They're easy to handle because we know where they are.
Sure.
This coronavirus, we don't know where it is in people for quite a few days.
Gotcha.
Like you're saying, they think they may have 1,000 cases in Ohio already. Whether they do or not, I don't know. But they could. And the problem is the long incubation period lets it transmit to more susceptible people
right.
Before they develop clinical
Now,
signs.
if that 14-day period passes, so let's say, it came into me, it went 14 days, but I didn't get sick and I didn't infect anyone, does it die? It goes away then? What happens?
Well, if you're infected, your immune response will start clear. You'll be sick and you'll stay quarantined.
Right.
You could break it 14 days and then you still got your sickness to go through and clearing the virus from your system.
But ultimately, it sounds like even this, from the reports, is that it has similar symptoms and experiences like the flu, and there's a really pretty good chance that you're going to get over it.
That's all their data they're getting now. That's true. Is it young people, children are not affected by it very much. They can be infected, but they're not showing signs and symptoms, which is a problem because they're asymptomatic and they can be spreading the virus.
They don't clean their hands as quickly. Yeah.
Well, yeah. My children are perfect.
Yeah.
They always wash their hands and cover their mouth at least 10% of the time.
Is that because you trained them to do that,
Yeah,
right?
10% of the time.
10%.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of my follow-up. How long can this virus actually hang around in terms of the whole nation?
In the environment or around the whole nation? The virus itself, I've heard time 7 days on a surface.
Okay.
Be still viable. But in veterinary medicine, we have a different problem. Our viruses are out in the environment. So sunlight, heat, moisture, all those things affect the survivability of a viable virus. So they're saying 7 days on a hard surface. I assume they mean in a house somewhere or in a chair somewhere.
Now I have heard about that. So some say that they don't know if the temperature goes up, if it gets hotter, that it will really remove this or kill, I suppose, the virus?
Well, that's a host factor.
Okay.
In any disease, there's 3 determinants. There's the host, the environment, and the agent.
Okay.
And each one of these determinants, they have factors that interact.
Sure.
So the virus, we're not changing very much.
Right.
It's new. The host, yeah, we're all going to be changing because we'll be exposed to that and other things. Our immune may be good. We may get tired. We're anxious. We're more susceptible. Once we've been infected, we'll have probably reasonable protection for a while. There was talk about reinfections, but I think those were probably false negative tests in between.
Okay.
And then the environment, yeah, that changes by the weather. Right now it's snowing out there.
It looks pretty.
I'd like to be skiing today. I didn't know it was going to snow. But yeah, the heat will then activate the virus faster. I think whether it's warm or not is like polio. Polio was a disease in the end of the summer. And that's because people were in the water swimming and the viruses were in swimming pools. You're too young to remember this.
You're right, I am.
But in the days of the iron lung and kids, that's why it was always the end of the summer disease, because of the swimming pools.
I didn't know that. Wow. Okay.
And so, yeah, it's warmer, so we get more polio. Well, it's not having anything to do with the agent.
Gotcha.
It's the host
Gotcha.
and the environment.
Gotcha. That's helpful, very helpful. So I've heard that it has less effect on children, and you kind of mentioned that, and that the spread of the virus is perhaps more easily because they're not as concerned about their hands and all of that. And this again is true?
That's two questions.
Okay, yeah.
Number one, kids don't wash their hands.
Right.
Cover their cough as often as humans.
Right.
Or adult humans.
Right. The adult humans.
The adult humans. But the other thing is that kids, every infectious agent has a preference for age or the host that they want. Influenza usually starts off with it's high in children, drops down, and it's low, and then in old people it starts to come back in.
Okay.
The 1918 pandemic was a different one. It was lower in children. It hit middle age and then came down, and then the old people survived. So the viruses are very unpredictable what they're going to do. This virus, this coronavirus, looks like it's very mild in children, which is asymptomatic infections. They're shedding virus. They are contagious. And then it just gradually increases with age to 60.
Interesting.
And a few people.
So you're saying the 1918 pandemic did not harm older people?
Very little.
Wow.
Mainly it's middle-aged. I mean, it did infect some at both ends of the spectrum.
Sure,
But the main mortality was in young adults.
So there is that combination of not just the virus, but the host and what's going on there.
The triad.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's very helpful. So I see you have some masks, and my question is, are these masks helpful? Are these masks helpful?
I thought I'd explain what the masks are. Most people are not knowing what an N95. This is an N95 mask, and it's heavier. You can see it's lined.
Right.
It's lined with material that's filters 99% or 95% of the particulate matter. The virus is shed by either mucus. It travels with mucus, somebody coughing or a nasal discharge or whatever, or a cough, that large particle droplets. And that's why they say 6 foot.
Six foot distance.
Large particle droplets.
So I'm too close to you right now.
Yeah, that's okay. I didn't get tested this morning. But the particles drop out, and that's the distancing issue.
Yeah.
But this mask, I'm going to put it on, it's kind of awkward. But this is an N95 mask, and it's not a fitted mask. They talk about fitted mask. You keep hearing that. This is not a fitted mask. So you put this on, and then you press at the nose here. There's small, medium, and large of these masks, and I wear a medium. So, but the problem is it does increase the difficulty in breathing. It does restrict airflow. This is fitting pretty good because I'm really coming out from the huff or puff to get some air in there. If somebody has a respiratory problem already, that can be very, very, they should be checked and be careful. This is the old surgical mask, which everybody's pretty much familiar with, and that's what you're seeing people wearing on TV. When the mask is like this, it's not effective. You see people on TV.
Because they're not covering the nose?
Yeah, they're running around like this, or they're running around like that, and that does kind of decrease the effect. The purpose of this mask, the N95, is to prevent you from being exposed. This surgical mask is developed for surgeons and for people in dusty environments. It's not fitted nearly as well, so particles can get in. But the main purpose of this mask is to prevent the doctor or the surgeon from contaminating the surgical field or contaminating.
Right.
Like if I thought I was sick and I was going in someplace, or if I was going into a nursing home, I would wear this mask just in case I was asymptomatic, subclinical. It probably helps a little bit, but not a lot. But
I heard a lot of those have been sold out in different places.
well, these are the ones that have been sold out. The N95.
Oh, okay.
Those are, well, the others have also, but they're not that effective. I would wear them around people that are compromised. Even if I thought I was infected, I wouldn't go in.
Right.
But if I thought I was healthy, but going in, I would wear one of those surgical masks.
Okay, that's helpful. So how can we talked a little bit about how to avoid the virus, and so is there anything beyond the 6 foot and beyond the washing the hands and those kinds of things that you would like to add?
Well, let me see. I got to check my checklist here. I want to make sure I got everything. Okay, that. Okay, the social distancing, sanitation environment. We talked about how long the particles stay viable, scrubbing, that's the cleaning with the disinfectants, use Clorox wipes, alcohol. Personal hygiene is important. Personal protective equipment, which that is, but you see the booths that they're setting up now for drive-through testing.
Yes.
All the white suits,
Yeah.
Tyvek suits, face mask. Some of them are even wearing more difficult masks or more complicated masks than that N95. They're wearing face shields, and that's personal protective equipment. Like I would use that going in to see an older person, or if I was having to visit somebody that was sick, I'd probably wear the N95. Sure. I think this is probably, the isolation and quarantine. They talk about isolation and quarantine. Isolation if you're infected. Quarantine is when you're infected. Isolation when you've been exposed, They can be used synonymously probably. But we talked about people waiting to get the test, and they say, I got a test, now I'm not infected, I'm going to go out. That only means I wasn't infected and shedding detectable virus at that point. I could walk out the door and be shedding a virus. It could be just in the incubation period.
Sure, the 14 days.
Yeah.
We talked about.
I've got the virus, I'm shedding it, or haven't shed it yet, but it only pertains to the moment they took that test.
Gotcha.
So it's more of maybe an investigation or understanding the epidemic than it is
Full-blown
test. What are we going to do?
Okay, very helpful.
And that's probably why some of the testing has been delayed. They set it up for worst case scenarios, but now they're trying to get out. We want to understand the epidemiology of the disease. How many are asymptomatic? What's the age group? What's the occupation? How long are you asymptomatic? How long do you shed virus before you break? All these things will take time to develop an understanding of this disease. Influenza, we've dealt with it for years. We pretty much we know generally what it's going to do. But we know the incubation periods, we know when you shed, we know these types of things. We know how to get a vaccine. But these coronaviruses, we don't know a lot of that.
So I didn't have that on my questions, but there has been this issue of vaccines and possible. I've heard people say 6 months, a year and a half. I didn't tell you ahead of time, but any thoughts on that? What do you know about the vaccine?
Well, everybody thinks you just turn it on and that's what you get the vaccine. Turn the spigot on. It doesn't happen that way. It takes. When we have a whole system to produce influenza vaccines, and we look at the influenza viruses that are circulating and causing infections in the southern hemisphere, and with influenza viruses, there's this transequatorial swing. So what is in Australia, New Zealand, or South America tends to come north in our fall season and our winter season.
Okay.
So we have 6 months advance lead time to get the vaccine out. And they're sitting there with the whole skeleton, the whole foundation but the platform's all ready to go. They say, we think it's going to be this, and then they crank that virus into the vaccine, and they're all tooled up and ready to go.
Gotcha.
And it's been tested. They know it's going to work.
Wow.
Well, they know it's not going to be harmful. It works to varying degrees, depending on the match. This virus, to start from scratch on the virus, you want to make sure that it's safe to inoculate.
Right.
You want to make sure that it doesn't have an immune enhancement where you have partial immunity from a previous infection or vaccination, and you have partial immunity, the virus comes in, and it makes the disease worse. And that's what dengue hemorrhagic fever is, diseases like that.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all things that need to be ironed out before they really turn this loose. Remember back in 1976, the swine flu, that was another swine flu, not the 2009 swine flu.
Okay.
But at Fort Dix, they had the outbreak and they produced all this swine influenza vaccine. We thought it was the return of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And it turns out it's when we found Guillain-Barré syndrome associated with vaccination. Not a tremendous number, but there were people that developed this ascending paralysis called Guillain-Barré syndrome. So a lot of people were sick. The virus never ever produced an epidemic or outbreak. It never went past Fort Dix.
Right.
And I know it was, well, we won't go there. That's a
Yeah.
story. I don't wanna talk about.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some. Is there anything else we should think about with this virus?
Well, there's good information like hand washing. People say, well, yeah, I wash my hand. I'd go, if you're not familiar with it, go up on the internet and look at CDC coronavirus hand washing. And they'll show you how to wash your hands. And you say 20 seconds. Now, how many people wash their hands for 20 seconds?
Yeah, not usually 20 seconds.
Yeah. So how teaching the kids to wash their hands? Hand washing is
So I have a question about that. Does it have to be hot water?
helps.
It helps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gets more of the grease and such off.
Okay.
More of the crud. If you don't have hot water, you don't use hot water.
Right. You still
You
use
still use water.
water.
So there's a lot of good information up on CDC homepage, and Johns Hopkins homepage has a lot of information. I have some friends right now at Crested Butte that are out there skiing, and they've had their first case at Crested Butte. And I ski with some older people.
You ski though. That's awesome.
Yeah, but they're out there, and some of them do have health risks. So we're trying to be careful about that.
Sure. Well, Dick, thank you for taking this time, and I feel like I've had a good class and really learned a lot. This was very, very helpful. There's something about education that I think frees us and gives us a little more sense of confidence.
Yeah, it's...
How do you feel about it? Like, I mean, in your Christian walk, what do you, any
Christian-
comments or thoughts about
Christian
that?
walks, like you were saying today, our country may be confused, but God's not confused.
Right.
And that's who we're putting our trust. I don't say, well, some people, God is going to protect me, and I'm going to go out and make a careless move. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
But He gave us intelligence to make logical decisions.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think we're going to have more deaths, unfortunately. It's going to be sad. We're going to have more cases. Terribly disruptive to society now, especially yesterday and today, things they're doing. There's going to be people that have a very difficult time with these limitations we put on our society right now.
Right. No, it is very serious.
But it's very important.
Thank you again. Really
Good.
appreciate it. Very good.
Read this.
Yeah.
Say goodnight, Gracie.
Is that all?